was a district court judge. He later became a circuit court judge. He was a Republican and very conscientious, fair. If he got convicted, he was a stiff sentencer, but he was a good man. He was a good judge. Well, and I'd have to say, I just, reassessing it, I would have to say there'd be a tie between Ira Butterfield and John Lemming. John Lemming was the kind of judge I'd like to think I could be. He was a down-to-earth guy. He understood people. He understood their problems. He understood that we make mistakes. That $37.50 a week for daily PP testing is ridiculous when there's no reason for it. So I would say that John Lemming had his feet firmly on the ground. He had that sense of purpose. And there's quite a glaring difference between he and Ira Butterfield, believe me, in philosophy and ideology, but even in their courtroom manners. But they both had integrity, in my opinion. They both had a good sense of their place in our system and our society. And we sure have lost that now, because there's this holier than thou attitude. There's this clique built between the prosecutor's office and the judges. It's not just Judge Kelly. I mean, Judge Sheeran was former chief prosecutor, and you wouldn't have believed what I witnessed between Sheeran when he was the chief prosecutor and Bill Caprathi when he was the judge, and they went through the Donna Yost trial. I mean, it's just awful to watch the tag team of Caprathi and Sheeran and what they did to that woman. I watched it. I tried it. It was just disgusting. And they know I felt that. I refused to go to Caprathi's retirement when he retired for that reason. Really had no respect for him as a judge, not after that trial. And as you may know, the Court of Appeals reversed her conviction, and they found that Caprathi had abused his discretion on 4 different issues. Abuse of discretion on one issue is enough to overturn a conviction. Okay? 4 of them. And one of them, the lawyers hadn't even briefed up. The Court of Appeals found on their own. And what happened as a result? The prosecutor appealed that to the Supreme Court when there was no way that the Supreme Court would even grant review. Because you don't have an automatic right to review at the Supreme Court. It must be by permission only. So they went up, kept Donna behind bars for another year before the Supreme Court said, no, we're not going to hear this. They rarely would when it was 3 judges to 0 ruling in the woman's favor. And not only did they reverse her conviction on 4 different issues, but they published a decision. When you publish a decision, when a court says, we're going to publish a decision because it's making new law, and it did. People versus Yost is cited all the time in Michigan. And so after the Supreme Court said, no, we're not going to hear this case, what happens? It comes back to trial. What did I do? And by the way, I handled her matter for almost 10 years at no charge. And I could not believe what they were doing to this woman. So what happens when it comes finally back to Bay County and they got to try the case a second time? I filed a motion asking Caprathi to disqualify himself. I mean, my God, a higher court found that he abused his discretion. They didn't just disagree. He abused his discretion. 4 issues. He refused to do it. He was determined he was going to stay on that case. And Sheeran is going to try it again. Excuse me, by then it was Kurt Asbury, his chief assistant who was elevated to prosecutor, just like Penzine's chief assistant Mullison was. Penzine got elected judge, and so he takes the judgeship, and now he and the other judges appoint Penzine's former chief assistant, George Mullison. Same thing happened here, okay? Sheeran gets elected judge, and then he and the other judges appoint Kurt Asbury, Sheeran's former chief assistant. Now he's the prosecutor. So we have this musical chairs, this rotation, this perpetuation of power, just held by just a few people. And that, that's why we have to disrupt this. Something has to change. I know I digressed, but when you ask who was the best judge in this town, with my history, it's hard to, but we latched on two good ones. Yeah. Was there a second half that said who was the worst? The worst. Yes. Well, I wouldn't be on the stage if I didn't believe it was Judge Kelly. And let me tell you something. Close behind him is Eugene Penzine. And I battled with Penzine too. In fact, I battled with Penzine so fiercely that it made case law. Czuprynski versus Bay Circuit Judge. That's a published decision that made law in Michigan. But Kelly, I would have to say that Kelly's worse because he's so arrogant. He knows he can do what he wants to without opposition or resistance. And it's not good. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. My name is Charles Natke, and I actually have a couple questions for you, if it's okay.
Well, we don't have a long line.
Okay. It was brought up earlier that you dropped out of high school, but is that the extent of your educational experience?
Yeah, I mean, they'll let you in law school with your GED. No, it's a legitimate question. After I got my GED, I kicked around in life, okay? I sold shoes at the shoe market, no longer there. I drove truck for 7-Up, worked construction. I graduated from the School of Hard Knocks when I decided I'm going to go after my formal education. With the GED, all I could do was get into Delta College, a community college, because all I had was my GED. So I did well enough at Delta, MSU accepted me. After 2 years there, I graduated magna cum laude with high honors. I wanted to be into law school at that point, and I got into law school. And I freelanced as a licensed private detective during my years at Michigan State University in law school. So I do have an education. I would have to say, though, that my best education has been in life. This experience right now, this effort to make a difference. We can make a difference. And it's so sad when I look back on the way it used to be to the way it is now. It's disturbing. We don't care enough. And those who do don't number enough. We can make a difference. I'm asking you, there's a number of things you can do after tonight. We're going to have some extra literature back there. When you get it, grab it on your way out. And when you see a Kelly sign tomorrow or the next day, stop. Knock on the door. Say, hey, do you know anything about this guy, Kelly, that you got the sign up there for? Did you get permission to put that sign out because we're finding that's not being done? And then if they say, no, I don't really know much about him, well, here, take this piece of literature and read it. And then see if you really, in good conscience, keep the sign up. But I'm digressing.
The next question is, I heard you mentioning that there's others that do support you, but they have to do business in the courthouse. Mm-hmm. And also because you are a counsel, you might represent a competitive interest where they can't really put your sign in their office windows.
Oh, it happens all the time.
But are you aware that there are other agencies out there, I won't mention them by name, that they are very active in putting their signs up in all their yards. They're going out, they're coming to me constantly asking for more signs and more signs.
On my campaign?
On your campaign. But they can't come forward and say that they are directly supporting you because they are concerned that they will get retribution.
Yeah, I've run into that. There's some owners of a very well-known restaurant in this town who are actively trying to help me however they can through their network and grassroots, but they don't dare put a sign in their business or even at their home. They don't dare sign an activist card lest their name be associated, but they're 100% behind me. And, you know, isn't it a sad state of affairs? Isn't it really a sad state of affairs when it comes to that? Isn't this a democracy? Isn't this supposed to be a free country? Why is that? I mean, I could tell you some of the stuff they put me through because I stood up to them. And I will stand up to them till my last breath. Thank you. Anyone else? What's our next? Okay.
Okay, we heard my name's Irene Marcus. And who would you rate today as the best judge here in Lake City? Because I don't seem to know.
Presently, right?
Present, today.
To an extent, I've liked what I've seen in Harry Gill in the circuit court. The longer he's been on the bench, the longer I've had to study him and watch him. And the thing that's starting to disturb me is that he seems to be pretty much into that clique in the courthouse. I think, for instance, in Kurt Asbury's re-election just recently, and I don't have the figures right here with me, but I believe it was Harry had contributed $200 to the prosecutor's election effort, and his wife contributed $800. Now, you know, I don't know about you folks, but that really leaves a sinking feeling with me that we have a judge throwing that kind of money at the prosecutor's re-election efforts. And you know, I'll tell you another thing that really sickens me. I mentioned earlier that I'm self-financing my campaign. You know how Kelly's financing his campaign? He gets a group of 4 lawyers to sign a letter, his committee, soliciting fundraising tickets from the lawyers in town. Every lawyer got a town. Well, not every lawyer, but a lot of them. Okay? And you know, think about it. Do you just throw that in the trash? What if he finds out? What if he checks it to see who's contributing, who's not contributing? Is this what we have? Is selling justice in this town? To a large extent, yes. Okay? And he didn't stop there. I couldn't believe this. He went even further. He sent out a fundraising solicitation, well, his committee did, to Midland and Saginaw lawyers too, very extensively. And it was at the Saginaw Country Club, I believe it's called. And you know, these are lawyers that won't even really practice in this court. But it's that connection, it's the intimidation, it's the tacit message that you're being called upon, counselor, and you better cough up. That's so inherently wrong, but that's the way it's done. Mm-hmm.
Very sharp.
Yeah.
You've made your case of why you want to unseat Judge Kelly. Why do you want the job, and what would you do to smash the political machine into scrap iron?
Well, like I said earlier, I personally don't want the job, okay? I feel compelled to run because I'm not getting any younger. This is the year to take them on and put them out of business if it's going to happen, because after this year, it just continues to be entrenched more and more. And so I'm not running because I want to be a judge. In fact, on the large scale, I don't have a real high opinion of a lot of judges. There are good ones, and when you got a good one, by God, they're worth their weight in gold. I'll give you an example. When I filed my candidacy to run against Kelly, just in May, what did he do? The chief judge issues a memorandum to the court clerks and says, don't accept any cases from Ed Czuprynski that are assigned to me because of his candidacy. So all the clerks suddenly they won't accept my cases. I mean, people hire me, they want me, and I'm told I can't file to be their lawyer because Judge Kelly issued this memorandum. So I start, and Kelly, by the way, through his finagling, through his administrative order, handles 50% of the cases in Bay County. So I was froze out of 50% of the cases through his memorandum. Not an order, a memorandum. So what did I do? This is just this year, a few months ago. I started filing motions and talking to people and making a protest because a memorandum is not a court order. Okay? And yet everyone's treating it like a court order. So I start, complaining about memorandums are being substituted for orders, what's going on, and that doesn't look good to them. So Tim Kelly, as chief judge, appoints Dawn Clyda, to be the temporary chief judge, so that she can enter an order saying Czuprynski can't be involved in any of Kelly's cases. All right, now I got my order. So what am I going to do? I can't continue like this. I filed a lawsuit against Clyda and Kelly. It's in my brochure. It's called Lawless Judges Ordered to Follow Law. Because here's what happened. This gets back to that message about what a good judge can be. Of course, I had an outside judge brought in. What else, how else are you going to get justice in this town on something that politically charged? And Mark Duthie out of Isabella County was appointed. I've known him. I've practiced in about 6 or 7 main counties. I knew him to be a good judge. And so he comes to town, and he looks it all over. And by the way, I didn't tell you this, when I filed a lawsuit against Clyda and Kelly, because they were in cahoots and froze me off the cases involving Kelly, what happened to Clyda? She ended up entering another order saying, well, Ed Czuprynski's filing a lawsuit against me now, so he can't handle my cases either. So I was being frozen out of 50% of the cases, so then when I filed an action challenging the way they were doing it, I all of a sudden got up to 75% of the cases I was being refused any involvement in. Do you know what it does when you're probably the most active criminal defense lawyer in Michigan or in Bay County and you can't do criminal cases, at least 75%? It's devastating financially. So Judge Duthie from Isabella County came over and heard it all, looked at it, and you know what? He ruled in my favor. Because the law, when you file to challenge a judge's reelection, the law says that the judge must disqualify himself from the lawyer's cases during the pendency of the election. That makes sense. There's 2 other judges that could handle them, right? No, they didn't follow the law in this town. It took an outside judge to enter an order, and you know what? He heard the proofs, he heard the arguments, he reviewed the matter, and he entered his order that same day. He didn't take it on advisement. It was so clear to him. It's such a flagrant abuse of the law and the system that he didn't need to study it. He knew what the law was. And not only that, but great respect for the guy. He said, I'm not going to have somebody, prepare an order and, try to get a, agreed upon language. I'm just going to do it myself. So before the guy got in his car and drove back to Mount Pleasant, he himself drafted the order that ended the ban that these 2 lawless judges enforced against me because I had the audacity to challenge Judge Kelly's reelection. What is happening in this community? Why are we putting up with this? This is the same guy who for over a decade acted without legal authority and doing all the domestic violence cases. This is why I'm running, okay? And it's going to be a big sacrifice if I win because it's going to be a pretty good pay cut. Plus, I can't have my practice of law anymore. I start renovating the 2nd, 3rd floors of my building with the intent of living there. So it's a big upheaval in my life. It's cost me a lot of money. Heck, it cost me $35,000 at least when he froze me out of 75% of the cases for 2 months. And I have overhead, I have staff, I have mortgages, like everyone else. Man. And I realized at the time, wow, this is really a hit. Sure, I was willing to self-finance my campaign, but I didn't know I was going to have to really tighten the belt and actually borrow money to make ends meet for 2 months because this guy was vindictive and he retaliated by abusing his power. Boy, and then you know what's really sickening? I predict this. This Bay County Bar Association, which I refuse to associate with, is going to have a new rating, you know, where they all send in their ratings without their names tied to it, anonymous rating. And I predict that I will be rated no recommendation. I think that's the one that they'll pick with me. And of course, they're going to be talking about how Kelly is just a super great judge. And again, it's that power. It's the intimidation. It's the good old boy system in this town. We've got to break it up. And this is the year to do it. Thank you. Anyone else?
Hey, Ed, if you want to field any more questions, I have a few more that came in through Facebook or emails if you want to take a look at them and see if anything's interesting or if
I'll leave it up to these folks. I don't want to hold them up too long. We're close to the end of the program. We have one here.
I guess there's another one here. But here's that list if you want to just...
Margaret DeHughes.
I'm sorry?
Margaret DeHughes. A comment first. I think each of us heard these stories this evening should walk out of here deeply concerned. Whether we have actually faced an incident in the local courts or not. There, for the grace of God, could go any one of us someday.
So true.
Who among us have not had an argument with someone that could have escalated at some point? One of the important points I think that you made tonight is the fact that they are budgeting this money that they get from doing these alcohol tests. Once that is part of the budget, it is very hard to get them to change.
Absolutely.
Because they need that money.
That's right. It's part of the sheriff's budget at this point.
I am brand new to the area. I'm not familiar with all the problems, the different issues that are presented, and I'm trying to familiarize myself with that. But when I hear these things, and I sense that judges have elevated themselves on some kind of pedestal where they feel that they can interpret laws in their self-imposed understanding of how that should work, irregardless of what any other rulings have ever said. That deeply bothers me.
And it should.
We are all human beings. We make mistakes and we deserve the right to be treated respectfully and with justice and fairness. Justice appears to have gone out the window with many of these cases that you presented tonight. And my question is, if this is happening in this area with the domestic violence cases, what about the other cases? Logic tells me that once this kind of attitude is pervasive in one area, it just seeps into all the other areas too.
Oh, it certainly can. Certainly can. That raises a question. We had, let me just take a quick look at these questions that came in on our email, Facebook. You've been described as a gadfly on M Live, are you? And luckily they gave me the definition of a gadfly because I wouldn't know it. A gadfly is a person who upsets the status quo. You're damn right I'm a gadfly, and I'm proud of it. Some people say you're too flamboyant to be a judge. What's your response? Well, you know what? Maybe we need a little more of that down-to-earth flamboyance, you know? I'm tired of this holier-than-thou attitude that some of these judges have. This is an interesting one. You've been a defense lawyer your whole career, which is true. So how would you expect to be a judge and not hold the same bias in your new capacity that you claim judges who used to be prosecutors hold? What makes the difference? The big difference is that I'm not part of that good old boy system. Okay? And the good old boy system, there's been this political inbreeding in the courthouse for way too long, where prosecutors are elevated to judge, and then their chief assistant prosecutors are elevated to the chief assistant. And it continues and goes in 43 years. It's perpetuated. So, and I'll tell you another thing. When you're a defense lawyer and you see the injustices that happen, like the Caprathi, Sheeran, Take team, the way they did that to that poor woman. I never did finish that story because she ended up copping a plea just to get out of jail because she knew if she went through that trial with Caprathi and Sheeran again, or Caprathi and Asbury at that point, it'd be more of the same. And no one wanted to go through, and I certainly didn't want to wait around for another 3.5 years on appeal and go through a trial that lasted 6 weeks initially. I'm doing it free charge. I lost a lot of money in trying that case, let me tell you, because when you're trying a case for murder during the day, you're working on it at night. And you can't be handling other cases when, you know, those are the stakes. So, anyway, I digressed again. When you experience the injustice and travesty of justice as a defense lawyer that happens through these prosecutor and judges acting in concert in cahoots, I think it gives you a different, or a very needed insight on the courts and the predicament and the wrongful structured system imposes on people who are accused of crime. Because not everyone who's accused of crime are guilty. We need a system that can ensure, you know, equal justice for everyone, and not just the select few that the self-anointed kings over there in the courthouse feel should get it. It should be for everyone. Anyone else? Let me just throw this one out here because this caught my eye too, and then we're going to move along. Some of these we've touched on with other ones. If you're elected judge, does this mean you can no longer work as a practicing lawyer? Yes. When you're a judge, you cannot be a practicing lawyer. You are a judge, and that's all you are. If you're elected judge, does this mean you would have to give up your law practice? Yes. It's worth it to me if I can make a difference in this town, especially in the criminal justice system, as the lady just talked about. That's really important because until you get caught up in the system, you can't appreciate the corrupted system that you face until you're into it. But until you're part of it and you're thrust into the whole mess, you can't appreciate how bad it is because you're on the outside looking in. And then here's one. I remember reading a couple different times about Judge Joe Sheeran trying to press a criminal contempt charge against you. I don't know if any of you folks remember that. Whatever happened to that anyway, and why did he claim you had committed criminal contempt? Well, I didn't, okay? And whatever happened to that thing, I'll tell you what happened to it. He made these allegations, grabbed some press, got some cheap headlines, slammed me, trying to discredit me. And they had their couple of news stories on it, and then time started to pass. Nothing was happening. Well, I'll tell you something. When a judge rules from the bench, when he makes his decision from the bench, it does not have the power of the law until he reduces his ruling to writing. And then once it's reduced to writing, he's got to sign it, and then that written order gets entered into the court record, and now it's got the legal authority. Because when you think about it, that's the only way it should be. Because otherwise people go, well, what did he say? You know, hey, reduce it to writing and get it entered. They didn't do that. Okay, and then people keep coming up to me and saying, you know, because if you get convicted of criminal contempt, that's a very, very serious and a rare thing. And you're going to lose your law license. So my practice of law took a hit. Who wants to hire a lawyer who can't handle their case to the conclusion because he's stripped of his law license because he was a criminal contempt person? So I wanted to get that cloud removed, okay? And what I did is I prepared an order for the judge's signature, and I submitted it under a court rule that allows you to do that. You prepare your